The moment she heard the words, her world cracked open. Inside a quiet car parked in Jacksonville, Florida, 27-year-old Bonna Williams sat frozen. The police had just told her what she'd been dreading. They knew. They had discovered the truth she'd worked so hard to bury. For months, she'd played the part of the worried mother. She called 911, cried, answered questions, and told everyone her 5-year-old daughter had vanished into thin air. But none of it was real. This wasn't the case of a child wandering off or being taken by a stranger. This was a mother hiding a horrifying secret. And now her mask was falling apart in real time. It all began on the morning of November 6, 2019. At around 7 a.m., Bonna called emergency services. Her voice sounded panicked, but her words were oddly calm. She claimed her daughter, Taylor, was gone, simply missing from their home when she woke up. There were no signs of forced entry, she said. Nothing broken, no noise, no struggle, just silence. One moment Taylor was there, and then she wasn't. The police responded quickly. Officers knocked on doors, searched every corner of the house, and questioned Bonna repeatedly. They brought in tracking dogs and even dispatched a helicopter to sweep the area. An Amber Alert went out, but as the hours ticked by, something felt off. Bonna wasn't acting like a mother in crisis. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't frantic. In fact, she barely reacted at all. And when detectives dug deeper, the details of her story began to crack. She said she had just picked Taylor up from her grandmother's house, but the timeline didn't add up. She said Taylor had been with her the night before, yet there were no signs of a child living in the home. No toys, no clothes, no fingerprints on the mirrors or juice stains on the carpet. Just a quiet, spotless space, like a child hadn't lived there in a long time. And the most haunting question of all, if Taylor had vanished that morning, why had no one seen her for months? To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we have to go back. Before the call to 911, before the lies, back to who Bonna Williams was and who Taylor could have become. Bonna Shatty Williams was a U.S. Navy petty officer, a single mother in her 20s. She was known for being quiet, private, and hard to read. On paper, she looked responsible. She had a stable government job, wore a uniform, and seemed to be providing for her daughter. But people close to her sensed something was always off. She moved often, never settled in one place for too long, and rarely opened up to co-workers or friends. Then there was Taylor, a beautiful 5-year-old girl with big eyes and a love for her pink stuffed bear. Mr. Bear went everywhere with her. Teachers said Taylor was polite but quiet, a little behind in speech, but curious and kind. She had been attending daycare on the Navy base and was enrolled in speech therapy. For a time, everything seemed normal. She was growing, learning, smiling. But something changed. Starting in the spring of 2019, Taylor began missing her sessions. First, it was occasional. Then it became routine. Eventually, she stopped showing up at all. When daycare staff tried to follow up, they were told she'd moved or was staying with family. There was no formal explanation, just silence. Her father, Maurice, hadn't seen her in months. He remembered the last time at a family funeral. Even then, he had concerns. Taylor seemed smaller than she should have been, thinner. He worried she wasn't eating enough. But whenever he tried to reach out, Bonna had already changed her number. Again, the red flags were there, but no one put the pieces together. Not until it was too late. Bonna had started telling people that Taylor was misbehaving, stealing food, acting out, becoming too much to handle. Some believed her, others didn't know what to say. But behind the scenes, a child was vanishing. Not all at once, just a little more each day. On the surface, Bonna's 911 call sounded like the desperate plea of a mother in crisis. She said Taylor had disappeared from their home on Ivy Street sometime during the night. No signs of a break-in, no witnesses, just a missing child and a terrified mother. But as police walked through the house that morning, the scene didn't feel right. There was no mess, no scattered toys, no children's clothing. In fact, there was almost no evidence that a 5-year-old had lived there at all. Officers did find a strange dark stain on the bedroom door, which they initially feared could be blood. But the test came back negative. Still, it stuck with them. Something was wrong. Bana said she had woken up around 5:30 a.m. and noticed Taylor wasn't in bed. She claimed the back door was open and assumed her daughter had wandered off. She even said she heard noises the night before. A dragging sound, maybe footsteps above her room. But she didn't check. Why? Because she had a gun nearby and was too scared to look. That explanation made detectives pause. She was a trained Navy officer, and yet she didn't check on her child? When pressed, her story kept shifting. One moment, Taylor had just returned from visiting her grandmother in Alabama. The next, Bana said she had picked her up on Halloween. But Halloween had been a full week earlier. The officers could feel it. This wasn't the case of a missing child. This was a cover-up. Soon, they started looking into Bana's recent history. That's when they realized something chilling. Taylor hadn't been seen by anyone in over 6 months. Not at school, not at daycare, not by friends or neighbors. And yet Bana was insisting that her daughter had just disappeared that morning. That morning might have been when the call was made. But it wasn't when the tragedy started. With the timeline falling apart, investigators expanded their search. They looked into Bana's previous addresses and contacted anyone who might have seen Taylor in recent months. What they found only deepened their concern. At her last residence, a small, cluttered apartment, detectives discovered a haunting scene. Garbage bags lined the walls. The air was heavy with the stench of bleach and chemicals. And there, buried in the trash, was a pink stuffed animal. It matched the one Bana said Taylor never went anywhere without. It was Mr. Bear. Other toys were stained, some with what appeared to be human waste. They found notes from the daycare center requesting extra clothes for Taylor, art projects she had made, and even a handmade card the little girl had drawn for her mother. These weren't just trash. These were memories, and Bana had thrown them away. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and the response was immediate. The dogs alerted to the scent of human remains in the living room carpet. Then again in Bana's car. The trunk gave off the strongest signal. Inside, officers found a strange white residue and the faint smell of cleaning agents. It was as if someone had tried to erase a story, but traces of it still lingered. When police canvassed the neighborhood, only one man could remember seeing Taylor, and even he hadn't seen her in months. He recalled one time, back in April, finding her wandering the parking lot alone, looking for her mom. He walked her back to Bana's door. That was the last time he saw her. Investigators checked with Taylor's daycare, therapist, and even her speech pathologist. They all told the same story. Taylor had stopped showing up in April, and no one had heard from her since. When they contacted Bana's mother, Carissa, she revealed that she hadn't seen Taylor in nearly 2 years, completely contradicting Bana's version of events. Piece by piece, the image became clear. Taylor hadn't vanished overnight. She had slowly disappeared from public life, from family, from care, and no one had noticed. By November 12, 2019, police were ready to act. They had no body, no confession, but they had enough to arrest Bana Williams. Her lies, the timeline inconsistencies, the alerts from cadaver dogs, and the total absence of Taylor in the public eye for months. It all pointed toward something deeply wrong. Because Bana was active duty Navy, investigators coordinated with her command. A superior officer was asked to quietly escort her from the base to the police station. The plan was simple: bring her in without alerting her. But during the drive, something unexpected happened. Bana collapsed. The officer panicked and rushed her to the nearest hospital. Doctors quickly discovered that she had ingested laundry detergent. A last-minute attempt to take her own life before facing what she knew was coming. She survived, but was placed under medical observation in critical condition. Once stable, Bana was brought back in for another interview. This time, there were no excuses. Investigators laid out everything: the timeline, the false statements, the evidence in her apartment, the GPS data from her car. One location caught their attention: a stretch of dirt road in rural Alabama. Bana had stopped there for nearly 20 minutes during a recent trip. The area was remote with almost no traffic. It was also just a few miles from the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. A search team was immediately dispatched. What they found was heartbreaking. In a wooded area near the cemetery, investigators discovered human remains wrapped in a plastic shower curtain, partially buried and heavily decomposed. The small size of the body, along with the location and evidence, led authorities to believe they had found Taylor. Though it would take weeks to confirm through forensics, the case had effectively shifted from a missing child to a presumed homicide. But with no clear cause of death and a decomposed body, prosecutors faced a challenge: proving intent, neglect, and responsibility, all without a confession. The discovery of Taylor's remains shattered any remaining hope. What began as a mother's 911 call ended in the most tragic way possible. A child found dead, discarded in the woods, wrapped in plastic. There was no accident, no last-minute rescue, just silence, and a trail of missed chances that led to a grave beneath the trees. Though Bonna Williams wasn't charged with murder at the time, she faced multiple counts of child neglect and giving false information to law enforcement. The condition of Taylor's remains made it difficult to confirm how she died. But investigators and the public saw the bigger picture. A little girl had vanished for months, and no one spoke up, no one checked, and the one person who was supposed to protect her had been hiding the truth. Taylor's father, Maurice, was devastated. He had tried to be part of her life but was pushed away at every turn. Bonna moved frequently, changed phone numbers, and made contact nearly impossible. Now, all he had left were photos and painful memories of the little girl he once held. Neighbors were left stunned. Daycare staff who once played with Taylor were heartbroken. Co-workers who thought Bonna was quiet but reliable were shaken. Everyone had seen bits of the story, but no one had seen the full truth until it was too late. The Navy launched its own internal review, and Bonna was removed from active duty. But beyond the legal outcomes, one question remained: how does a child disappear in plain sight? Taylor's case became a painful reminder of what happens when warning signs are overlooked, when lies go unquestioned, when a child is silenced, and no one listens closely enough to hear it. She was 5 years old, full of life, full of potential. She should have been in kindergarten drawing pictures, learning her ABCs, cuddling with Mr. Bear. Instead, her story ended alone, far from home, with no one to say goodbye. Justice may still be catching up, but Taylor's voice, though quiet in life, will not be forgotten.